Hello everyone and welcome to another ModellingSeb video. 2 weeks ago I finished the Shelf Queen T-34 project, which means now it's time to save another. And this time it'll be a Dragon Panzer IV Aufs E Vorpanzer. I feel it's kind of nice to now be making the main opponent of the T-34 as well as ticking off another Panzer IV variant from my very long build list. Some of you will already know this, but I am planning on building all the vehicles and variants that use the Panzer IV chassis. But anyways, back to the kit. This was a model I bought and started all the way back in 2022 during the first COVID lockdown. This is also when I got back into this hobby. Now, was it foolish of me to buy a Dragon kit as one of my first models? Yes, absolutely, which is why I left it for so long before deciding to finally finish it. For this project, I also have a set of figures from Evolution. These were given to me by a friend of mine and I think this would be the perfect project to use them for, which means yes, my terrible figure painting is back, so you should be excited. Now, for a little bit of history, the Panzer IV was the most produced tank of the German army in World War II. This is speaking of proper tanks with turrets and all, not self-propelled guns. It originally began its life as an infantry support tank, which is why the early variants were armed with a very short barrel. This means their original role was to lob high explosive rounds against infantry and emplacements. Of course, later on, around 1942, the Panzer IV would receive the Long 75, or at least the first Long 75 before being upgunned again later on. However, this variant, the E, was the penultimate one before the upgrade, with the latter versions of the F2 receiving the first Long 75s. The Panzer IV would be produced all the way from 1936 up until the final days of the war. Although by then production was already supposed to stop. Yet even though this was originally an interwar design, it somehow lasted all the way to the 70s. Yes, the 70s, serving with Syria in both the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. The Panzer IV is often called the workhorse of the German army. However, I do know that military history visualized does have a bit of a problem with that. Sorry mate. Now, I could get into a full service history of the Panzer IV, but we do not have all day. This model needs to be painted after all. So to do this, I began with preparing the model, which means I needed to get some primer, or should I say primers. The metal details get a couple coats of VMS metal primer. This is a very good primer and has never so far given me any issues, so I do highly recommend it. Since this is a Golden Age Dragon kit, it does come with a bunch of photo etch and this metal barrel. It also includes a full turret interior. With the metal primed, it's time to hit the whole model with my favourite Gunze 1500 Black. This will be very useful, especially considering I want to post-shade this model to the moon. I've left the turret in 2 pieces for easier access to the interior for now. And this is where I start my priming. Since this interior isn't a flat piece, it's not as easy to prime. So I kind of have to wiggle my way in so that I cover the turret basket so that just in case it is seen, it's not bare grey plastic. I then decide to prime the add-on armor separately for reasons that will become obvious later on. Or if you already saw the thumbnail, that is. Finally, the hull gets a nice and even coat of primer. Now, since the turret interior is going to be visible, this is the first thing I decide to paint. German tank interiors were painted in an ivory or off-white colour for most of the war. However, if I were to cover the whole interior in a single flat layer of off-white, the artist within me would just not be satisfied. So to still create some artificial shadows, I decide to pre-shade with flesh. Now, flesh is an odd choice, I do know that, but it's a very warm tone and it is perfect for the job. This is because when the white is sprayed on over the top, it will not only become an off-white tone, but it will also allow for shadows to be made. The interior of the turret doesn't need too much work since the majority of it won't be visible. But since at least one of the turret hatches will be open, I still need to weather it slightly. For this, I use an interior wash which creates some small areas of grime to help the vehicle feel lived in. I follow this up with some red primer chipping around the edges of the hatch. With this done, the 2 halves of the turret are glued together and the whole model is ready to be painted. Now here is where I have a small problem. This model was painted all the way back in May of 2024. This script is being written in January of 2025, and in my great genius, I didn't write down any of the paint ratios, so please do forgive any mistakes I might make. The base coat was a mix of Gunze German Grey and Tamiya Medium Blue. This is sprayed on in quite a thick but still cloudy pattern. This is because the black undertone is quite prevalent when Panzer Grey is used over top. This could result in the grey being heavily muted, but also in some cases, if the coverage isn't thick enough, the colour will appear solely black. This is not an issue with, let's say, Soviet 4BO or US olive drab. With the first layer out of the way, it's time to truly begin the post shading. I've never liked a dull Panzer grey, and what I'm going to do here is definitely too much for some people who want to be a bit more realistic, but I think a much more blue Panzer grau will be very nicely contrasted with the patchwork that will happen later on. For the first highlight, I increased the amount of medium blue in the base coat to now being an even amount and add a small bit of light grey. This will make the transition into the second highlight a little bit less jarring. This highlight is sprayed in a mottled pattern to still have some of the darker undertones coming through. This ends up looking quite a bit like distressing. Now onto the second highlight that adds a little bit more light grey to the mix. The process of mottling is repeated again here, however I do decide to cover only the centres of each panels. This will help create some fake shadow effects which will improve with the fourth coat, this one being the shadows. For this shadow I used pure German grey. This is also why the initial base coat was a mix with medium blue. This shadow coat is used as sort of pin wash. I spray it around the deepest crevices and places where a pin wash would normally go. This means that all the panel lines, weld seams and rivets need to be given an outline with the shadow. Placing the shadow now rather than at the start and slowly building up is quite good, and in my honest opinion has a lot of benefits over the traditional method. Firstly, any minor mistakes from the shadow layer can be fixed by the final highlight. And secondly, and probably most importantly, you aren't limited to how you have to post shade. The way in which I model my post shade will simply not be possible with a classic approach, because that one is only really suited to zenith lighting. But anyways, let's finish this Panzer grey. The final highlight is the previous highlight with some light blue. Again, yes, I absolutely love a very blue Panzer grau. This final highlight is only applied to the most raised details. This includes the extractor on the turret as well as the pistol port. Or is it a smoke launcher? I'm not exactly sure. I also cover the most protruding details such as the barrel and mantlet since they stick out a lot. Now this is my mandatory moment to say that if you are so far enjoying this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. This would help me out a bunch. I'm about to break 400 subs and I think it would be very nice to try and reach 500 by the end of the month. I have links to my socials and my Discord server in the description below. We are currently hosting 2 different group builds, so if that might sound interesting to you, please go check it out. Now enough of shilling myself, it's time to get back into the video. Before starting work on the patchwork parts of this Panzer IV, I would like to thank my friend Darren Wilkes from Top Notch Masks. He provided me with these masks for the Panzer IV. Now these are a bit of a prototype right now, so they're not available yet, but if you would consider checking Darren's store out, I would very much appreciate it. The link is in the description below. Now, masks are very common for aircraft modelers, especially for the canopy, however for us AFV modelers, not so much. Masking wheels is a bit of a rarity from what I've seen. But anyway, since I got these to test, I might as well do it. And before anyone says anything, this is my first time using masks, and they seem to work quite well. The material did catch me off guard at the start though. It's a bit more rubbery than masking tape. With the wheel masked up, it's time to paint it, and I did so with the second highlight layer. Each wheel gets a slightly different treatment to make them stand out a bit and create some visual interest, as well as some of them being painted in a completely different colour. And now talking about completely different colours, wow, I am simply fantastic at these transitions. It's time to talk about the most interesting part of this project. The add-on armour and the mismatched colours. In 1941, several Panzer IVs received an upgrade package, this being some additional frontal spaced armour. These plates were no thicker than 20mm and how much protection they actually added is questionable at best. But the kit did come with these, so why not use them? Now I would like to say I'm not a realistic modeler if that wasn't already made clear. This is why the cupola and space armour will be painted completely differently since the whole monotone scheme would be too boring. The red primer for the cupola and stowage bin is a mix of hull red and red from Tamiya. This is a slightly nicer and brighter tone than the heavily muted hull red meant for ships. In the same way that the whole tank was post shaded, these small elements get the same treatment. The first highlight is made by adding in some buff. This is because I don't want the cupola and stowage bin to be too red, since even my unrealistic painting has limits to it. I followed this up with hull red for the shadows, which stands out so much against the post shading. Even with the final highlight applied, this just being a bit more buff, the contrast is so heavy. I absolutely love it. The final thing that needs to be painted is the space armour itself. This received the exact same paint as the cupola on the T-34. This might be because the two are painted at the same time, I don't know. This means that the base coat is straight XF88. Since it's a bit too bright to be a shadow tone, I then highlight it with some buff, before then going back and making a shadow using dark yellow and flat earth. When you create a darker yellow tone for your models, it's better to go into a slightly brown tone in order to blend the colours together. The final highlight is just lightened with even more buff. Now for the thin tricolour camouflage, I use XF89 and 90 straight from the bottle. And I do freehand the lines, which is why there is so much overspray. With the painting now out of the way, it's time to just add the decals. These are 3 simple crosses applied to the sides of the hull and the back of the stowage bin. Before applying these decals, however, I do make sure to prepare the surface. For this, I use VMS gloss varnish. This, as always, has to be applied wet, which means a very thick layer. If you think you overdid it, don't worry, it's perfectly fine. I then use VMS decal solution when applying the decals onto the kit. And with this done, it's time to call it a day. This project has been a long time coming, and I must say, I think it was worth it. I really do think the model looks a lot more interesting and most importantly unique compared to other Panzer IV projects out there. Now, for anyone who was wondering why I came to choose the mishmash of colours, I'll tell you. Originally, when looking for inspiration, I came across several photos of different Panzer IVs with some patchwork done. This included one with a red primer cupola as well as mismatched shirts, which apparently wasn't uncommon to see. I also saw one of these with War Panzer tanks with a tricolour camouflage, so I just took all these together and made this. A patched up Panzer IV. Also, yes, I don't have any footage of the tracks being made. I don't know why, but for some reason the video corrupted, but not to worry, one of the upcoming videos will be all about tracks. Plus, how many times do you want to see a guy drill little holes in fuel tracks and just fill them in? Now, if you did make it this far, I am very thankful. It means a lot that you decide to spend your time watching this video. And I would like to ask you again, if you aren't subscribed, please do consider doing it. It costs you nothing and it helps me out a great deal in the algorithm. But anyways, now it's time to say our goodbyes. I sure hope you enjoyed this video. Now, I wish you happy modelling and goodbye.